Would you call the roll for me, please?
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and council members. This is the roll call for the special call meeting, August 26, 10 a.m. for the millage rate public hearing. The Honorable Mayor, William Bill Edwards.
Here.
Honorable Catherine Rao, Council Member District 1.
Present.
The Honorable Carmelita Gomes, Council Member District 2.
Present.
The Honorable Helen Z. Willis, Council Member District 3. The Honorable Naima Gilliard, Council Member District 4.
Here.
The Honorable Corey A. Reeves, Council Member District 5.
Accounted for.
The Honorable Councilmember Khalid, District 6. The Honorable Mark Baker, Councilmember District 7.
Present.
Mr. Mayor, you do have a quorum. Good to have a quorum. I have one ask this morning before we get into the agenda. Would like to have a short presentation by Mr. Donald and Mr. Millage concerning the process and what we're doing. If it's all right with the council, I would like to add them to the agenda for a brief presentation before we get into the public hearing.
Mr. Mayor, what do you need to do that? Do you need a motion?
I need a motion.
I move that we add the presentation from the city manager to the agenda.
Second.
Properly moved and second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, Mr. Clerk?
Councilmember Rao,
Yes.
Councilmember Gomes,
Yes.
Councilmember Willis,
Yes.
Councilmember Gilliard,
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves,
Aye.
Councilmember Baker.
Aye.
That item is approved, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you so much, everybody. Mr. Donald, are you ready with the presentation, and Mr. Millage?
Yes, sir. Mr. Adams, I believe, is going to pull it up and navigate it for us.
Yes, Ms. Caldwell Tolbert in our office will handle that, and it is available.
That works. Well, again, Mayor and Council, thank you very much for allowing us this opportunity this morning. I think we have all kind of heard from our residents that while many people, we have some very informed, educated residents, and they are very involved in the budgeting process and helping the city kind of move forward in world-class service delivery. We also have a lot of new homeowners and new residents who don't fully understand how the billing of their properties and things go. And so we requested to make a presentation that really breaks down the millage rate, how we budget, and the technical aspects of building a budget. And so I will quickly go through this presentation, and my partner, Mr. Millage, will be prepared to, answer any direct technical questions, as well as give technical insights into how we actually coordinate this process. And so, Ms. Caldwell, you can actually go to the first slide.
Actually, Mr. Donald, it looks like that might be the wrong one. I see Mr. Millage's name at the bottom. Ms. Caldwell, I'm going to put the proper one up right now for you.
Okay. Oh, that was the same one from yesterday. Got it. Bear with us for 1 second, please.
Hello, are we meeting? Is there a meeting happening?
Yes, sir. We are actually Mr. Adams is pulling up the presentation.
Okay.
All right, and so Mr. Adams, you can actually go to the next slide.
Mayor, can you ask Councilmember Gilliard to mute her phone?
And you can actually go to the next one. So just in general, when you look at
Before you start, Mr. Donald, will everyone mute their phones so that we don't have any feedback? Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Mr. Donald, go ahead.
Yeah, so, just in general, when we think about the millage rate and why it's important, it is the tax rate that's used to calculate, your local taxes. And so when the simplest way to explain it is when you multiply against the assessed value, which we'll go over here shortly, it calculates the amount of property tax, to be paid. It represents the amount for every $1,000 of the assessed value. And so a millage rate of 5 mills, which we use as just a simple example there. I'm not aware of any municipality that has one that low, but a millage rate of 5 mills is basically $5 per 1,000 of every assessed value. And when we calculate the millage rate, we look at it, again, if it's a value of 5 mills, it would be 0.005. And so you can go to the next slide. All right. And so when we look at the millage rate process and we use a zero-based budgeting process, the first thing is we start and build a zero-based budget, which we'll go over here shortly. The next piece is that we forecast all non-property tax revenues against the sum of those expenditures. So you start with the expenditures that are needed to deliver services, and then we forecast all non-property tax revenues to identify the lowest amount of funds needed from the actual property tax revenues. Step 3 is determining the amount of property taxes necessary to fund those expenditures. Basically expenditures minus non-property tax revenues. And then our city treasurer's office calculates the exact millage rate that would be needed to generate the necessary amount of property tax revenues to fund the budget. Next step, next slide. And so a big part of the process in developing budgets, identifying a millage rate and all of those things is actually outside of the hands of local municipalities. In Georgia, property is required to be assessed at 40% of the fair market value unless it is specifically specified otherwise in law. And so that is based on OCGA 4857, which is a state law that governs the actual tax assessment requirements. Property is also assessed at the county level by the Board of Tax Assessors. The State Revenue Commissioner is responsible for examining, all of the counties in Georgia in order to determine if property is assessed equally between the counties. Also, a requirement of state law. Property owners that don't agree with the assessed value on their proposed assessments may file an appeal to the County Board of Equalization, hearing officer, or arbitration. Also, a proponent and guideline of state law. I think last year our full council sponsored an educational event, actually multiple education events in partnership with the county to help educate people on how to appeal their assessed taxes if interested. Next slide. And so in addition to that, we wanted to just provide some insight into what exactly the Board of Assessors does. And so they appraise all real and personal property. They process the exemption applications. As you know, the city of South Fulton for the first time now has a homestead exemption, also, advocated and brought forward by our council to our state legislators to provide relief for our residents. They process property appeals. They maintain all the records of property ownership. They maintain property tax maps, and they prepare real and personal property tax digest on an annual basis, which the city just had a presentation on our property tax digest at our last meeting. Next slide. And so the role of the tax commissioner is a little bit different, but it works in concert with the tax assessor. So they calculate and print tax bills on behalf of all of the cities. They also collect taxes on our behalf. They distribute those tax monies to the county, the school boards, and the city municipalities, who all provide millage rates and levy taxes. They also process the motor vehicle tag applications and renewal and remit those monies to cities as well. Next slide. And so for this, I will actually bring Mr. Millage to chime in on the next few slides. But in general, we wanted to provide a very simple example of how the taxes are actually calculated, as that has been one of the questions that has come forth from our residents most often. I think over the last week, I personally received around 45 of those inquiries where folks did not understand how their taxes were actually calculated. And while we always refer folks back to the tax assessor and tax commissioner's office, we try to provide a high level of support for our residents. And so we provided some general information here. And so Mr. Millage, would you like to give folks this clear example of how taxes are calculated?
Yes, Mr. Donald. So in Georgia, all properties are calculated at fair market value, which is the assessed value is 40%. So we have given an example of a house that is worth 150,000. So the assessed value at 40% will be 60,000. So every homeowner in Fulton County has got homestead exemption of $30,000. So out of that 60,000, the assessed value, the balance will be, the net assessed value will be 30,000. So you'll be assessed tax on that 30,000 instead of the 150, because 150 you remove, you have the assessed value of 40, then you remove 30 again. So I see $30,000 times the millage rate, which is 0.5 mils. So out of the 150, you end up paying an annual property tax of $150. We go to the next slide. So this one shows how taxes are provided if you have homestead or it's non-homestead. So on the left side of this calculation is the non-homestead, and on the right side is the homestead. At the bottom, we'll see the difference of taxes, how much you pay if you are homestead or you are non-homestead. Both of them at the value of 100,000. And as I've said, that its assessed value is 40. So 40,000 from the times the 100,000, you get 40,000. And that 40,000 on the left side, which is non-homestead exemption. So there's nothing, it will be entirely 40,000 times the millage rate. And in this case, the millage rate will be, is calculated on the rollback, which is 12.399. So from the 100,000 home, in the non-homestead, you pay property tax of $495.96. That's on the left side if it's non-homestead. The same value of 100,000 on the homestead, which is on the right-hand side, that 40,000, you have to remove a homestead, local homestead of 30,000. So you have a balance of 10,000, and you are going to pay tax on that 10,000. Still calculated on the rollback, which is 12.399 mils. you pay property tax of $123.99 versus on the left of the non-homestead of $495.96, a difference of $371.97. Next slide.
Well, before we go to the next slide, Mr. Millage, I think it's important, for the edification of our public. I think, I would not want to speak on behalf of the council, but just provide some insights. The tax values of our city were depressed for quite some time, and the home values were much lower than we believe that they should have been. And so the rise came last year, and it was quite dramatic, where these values, should have possibly been at the current levels almost a decade ago or longer. And so to ensure that our residents, enjoy the new values that brought their homes, into the appropriate fair market value, but did not create an unbearable tax burden, the council went to the General Assembly and our state legislators to ensure that our residents received relief. And so we have definitely encouraged our residents to take advantage of this and, take advantage of the market. But at the same time, during the coronavirus pandemic, as you can see, if folks have taken advantage of it, these funds per a home is what comes in and actually funds our property taxes, which is the largest amount of funds that we receive. And so in addition to new assessed values being removed from our overall digest, as well as the impacts on the coronavirus, these benefits also impact the city's budget, which is why the rollback, has actually been the recommendation is what we received from the county, but also the recommendation for the proposed budget. You can go to the next slide. So,
Mr. Donald, can you explain, just while you're going through this presentation, can you explain to the public what a rollback means?
Yes, ma'am, it's coming. I'm going to move through these slides a little bit quicker, but I did want to give Mr. Millage some time to really break down the technical aspects. Him and his team have been very good at providing, one-on-one technical assistance when folks call in to get insights and things of that nature. And so I wanted him to be able to provide that type of feedback to our entire city, because most folks, are not as familiar with how these budgets and millage rates are built. But yes, ma'am, we'll get to that here shortly.
So what other revenue do cities receive? So this is in general. You see some of revenues here we don't receive, but we're just giving in general. The majority of the revenue comes from the property tax, sales tax, franchise fees, hotel motel tax, license permits fees, grants, intergovernmental agreements, motor vehicle, tickets, and there are toll roads. Where they have toll roads, those are sources of revenues. However, all these revenues are not from general fund. They are not all in general fund. As we talked yesterday, hotel, motel, 3/4 of the revenue from hotel, motel, it goes to promote businesses within the city through our convention center in this area that is read by our economic development office. Toll roads, again, is completely a separate fund, those who have got toll roads, and they have got different funding as well. So these are some of the major sources of revenue in municipal government. If we move to next slide. Current tax relief, we have Freeport exemptions, and as Mr. Donald has mentioned, the council took up to relieve some revenues, expenses on the property taxes by giving homestead exemptions. But we have to know that all these we are giving to residents at the same time is a reduction of our revenues coming in. Next slide.
I'll jump in here, Mr. Millage. One other thing that's probably important for our public, and I'll go to the next slide after this, but The homestead exemption is our effort to ensure that our residents, receive some relief on their tax burden, but our Freeport exemption for a specific portion of our tax base, which is our more industrial and logistics related companies who store firms that store product and are taxed heavily, for us to be able to, one, expand our borders as well as provide some type of business relief for new businesses that are entering into the city. We provided that same level for our businesses. And so these two efforts also offset some of the tax burden. But as Mr. Millage did highlight, it does remove funds from our overall coffers. And so, Mr. Adams, if you could go to the next slide. I think some of the other questions related to how we budget, which is both similar to other cities, but we've added some innovative ways to ensure that our public is involved, which I'll go through after this slide. The fiscal needs of the city, Mr. Millage serves as the city treasurer, and on a monthly basis, but really knowing him is probably even more often than that, he always looks at, the financial health of the city and makes recommendations throughout the year to both myself, but directly to the council. And so as a part of the budget process, he recommends a framework that we develop and implement in creating a budget before it is transmitted to the council. The third step is that my office actually works with the treasurer's office and all department heads and other staff leaders to develop a budget framework so that we understand the full needs to meet the service requirements prior to even an official draft coming to my office from the city treasurer. Once that is received, we take those recommendations, we confer with the council and our public through a variety of different ways, which I'll highlight on the next slide, to present a proposed budget to the mayor and council for their evaluation. I think that's very important, is because it is simply a staff perspective of the needs of the city. But our council, who reports directly to the public, holds, I think at last count, we had about 75 town halls conducted across our 8 electeds in our 7 districts, to really, and that is outside of any document evaluation, strategic plans, and other things of them just meeting with the community and fleshing out their needs. And so once they receive the proposed budget, in their wisdom, they make an adopted budget that really meets the needs of the residents fully. And so we present a framework, and then the council perfects it, which is the process we're going through now. Next slide. And so to talk about that proposed budget, there are a few terms that we talked about over the last couple of months, but the public has not always understood. And so the rollback rate, which you've heard Mr. Millage reference multiple times, is really just the millage rate that will raise the same amount of revenue as the previous year if it was applied to the current value of the property. And so while that is important, I think in our last meeting, Mr. Millage, as well as the tax assessor's office, highlighted that our tax rolls were reduced because properties that the tax assessor had appropriated to the unincorporated Fulton Industrial Boulevard were removed from our tax digest. That is important for multiple reasons. I think one, it's been very public that our council has advocated and fought to have Fulton Industrial Boulevard incorporated into our corporate limits, because it does, our residents have been paying taxes for that area for at least the past 2 decades. And so removing those the improvements and everything related to Fulton Industrial Boulevard has been funded by our residents. And so those taxes not only belong in the city, it has allowed us in our first 3 years to keep one of the lowest millage rates in our region to ensure that our residents receive services. And so not having that as a part of our corporate boundaries negatively impacts our overall budget. The previous millage rate of 11.579 without the rollback would result in an almost $2.5 million deficit in net levy, which means directly reduced from our already condensed budget. In addition, the proposed budget, which was forwarded to the council, also carries over a 15% recommended budget cut from the FY20 proposed budget that the city treasurer, in his wisdom, requested us to make across the board. And I think that's very important because not only has our budget basically been reduced by about 8% or 2.3 million, we also made additional cuts of 15% above that because the coronavirus pandemic has reduced revenues dramatically. And so the proposed budget that I forwarded to the mayor and council provides the rollback rate, and it is not having the authority to make any adjustments or recommendations on the millage rate per se. We provided a proposed budget that does provide a quality level of service, but it is greatly reduced, and the available resources are also greatly reduced. The last point on that is that when the city began, we had a fairly significant deficit. The bulk of our revenues were, to ensure that we were able to move forward appropriately, we took out a tax anticipation note, which has since been paid in full, actually early under the leadership of our council and city treasurer. But we have fought to have one of the first positive fund balances in the city's history and get us on strong financial footing, which has allowed us to maintain despite the coronavirus pandemic. But we are very close to our margins entering into a new year and the unknown. You can go to the next slide. And so some key considerations for our current budget, while the proposed budget is officially, my recommendation to the council of how we move forward in FY21, there are key budget considerations that the council is faced with this proposed budget, as it is significantly less resources than projected. There is no increase in police or fire positions, and so we would maintain the level of service that we have right now, where we are a little underfunded in our public safety activities. We would be able to maintain our current service levels, but I think our council and our public has made it very clear that they want a world-class level of service. And in full transparency, that is not an area that we would be able to commit to taking that next step in world class, although again, we would be able to maintain our current level of service. There's a limited ability to respond to infrastructure emergencies. I think folks are very aware that we just had a sinkhole in addition to some of the dilapidated infrastructure, roads and bridges that we inherited through the transition from the county. And I think I've probably been overly vocal about the overall neglect that the city's infrastructure received prior to our dynamic leaders taking over and investing these large amounts of money to make sure that we right, those long-standing wrongs. It also limits the overall maintenance fund for our public works transportation services. So the way we've been able to pave and fill potholes and things of that nature, we will be able to continue at the current rate, but some of the initiatives to accelerate that would be slowed. I think Mr. Millage has been very clear that no new capital projects have been authorized in the proposed budget because there is no funding. And some of the innovative things we've done to enhance our service delivery, like the beat study, which would accelerate bringing on an additional fire station, as well as implementation of the police beats to, again, lower our response times even more than they have been, would be delayed in implementation because we would not have, we currently won't have enough police officers in FY 21 to start to implement that. We do believe that as financial conditions improve, once the pandemic begins to subside, we would easily be able to start to implement that, likely in FY22. It would also, I think we've made great strides with the trash service. We have a transportation update that will be on the next work session, which I'm really excited about. We're now approaching 90% of compliance in the transportation sanitation program. But I think our council has been very interested in a single provider service, but that does require the city to take on additional costs, which in the current budget seem unlikely. We've also reduced the professional services citywide in just about every department. It also negatively impacts our council's ability to procure professional services as well. We will continue to extend the practice of hiring freezes at the beginning of the year. We've actually frozen all hires today, and we will not, unless it is an emergency or backfill that is deemed vital, we will not be filling any of those roles through the first quarter, meaning the first 3 months of FY21, which goes through January. And we will unfortunately be delaying some investments in technology and software until that time. And so while the budget does maintain these current services, the next steps as a young city, for the most part, are delayed into FY22. And so I believe that concludes. You can go to the next slide, but I believe, there is one thing that I did want to highlight, and I'm definitely thankful for the leadership of both our city treasurer and our mayor and council in ensuring that we have an open process for our budget despite the impacts of the pandemic. We implemented something that other cities in our region just simply don't do, and those are budget open houses, where we actually take feedback from our residents to create the budget initially, and then we take that feedback and include it in the proposed budget, which is something that I think our residents found exciting as well as educational. This year, because we are social distancing, we did not hold those sessions, but instead we let people into the room per se, where our budget deliberations were made public. So every meeting that was had with our department heads as we tried to deliver this proposed budget was actually recorded and streamed, and those things are readily available on the city manager's page, which is something that no one else in the state has done. And it was authorized by our council to ensure that our public understood the challenges that go into making these budgets and the overall decisions, not only for the millage rate, but also for the drafting of the budget. In addition to that, we partner with OpenGov and actually going live. I think we'll have some more public announcements in mid-September and how we have implemented that, but we've given insights into the budget. So in real time, you can quote unquote check the city's pocketbook, which is something that was unanimously coordinated by our council and led by, I believe, Councilmember Gums and Rao. And in addition to that, I think you're required to have one public hearing and budget presentation, but under the auspices of our council as well as our city treasurer, we actually held 3 to date, as well as the same amount of millage rate hearings. And so I think that concludes the presentation, and I hope it gave a quality overview of our process for not only developing the budget and who the various players are outside of the city, which we did not give a in-depth look into how the school system as well as the county's tax levy impacts. This was a city-specific look, but we did want to highlight the entire ecosphere of budgeting, developing a millage rate, as well as an overall budget before we deliver it, not only to the council, but before they adopt it and bring it forward to our residents. And so, Mayor, with that, unless I will defer to Mr. Millage for any additional comments. But with that, we would take any questions from the council. And so, Mr. Millage, do you have any additional comments before our council is allowed to chime in?
I think we just have to save comments, questions. I'll give comments depending on the questions and comments that our elected officials may have.
Absolutely. And so, Mayor, I hope that was a thorough enough presentation and provided, you know, the insights that the council would like for our citizens. And so, we would turn it back to you.
Okay, just like to say that we have been in a 10-hour meeting last night. This is about the presentation. And matter of fact, let me tell you right now, this presentation was excellent. Thank both of you for what you've done. So I'm going to turn the first question on, remembering that this is about the constituents. Ms. Willis, you're on.
Yeah, so I have a question. Can you go back to the slide where you're saying that we're going to have to cut the proposed budget where the services that's going to be impacted? And so these services that you listed that are going to be impacted, are these services will be impacted if we don't increase the mill rate, correct?
Well, so this is the budget considerations that I am proposing to delay based on the proposed budget. So based on the budget that I sent you, it has a flat list of police and fire position. There is no service improvement included. It is simply the same level of service that we provide now. There are no new capital projects because there is no funding for them. The beat study, which I think, you know, we're really excited about, but we would delay implementation for a year. And then the hiring freezes, which are traditional, we have moved those up to ensure that we get a good start for next year's budget. So these are the things that were kind of removed from the proposed budget because we did make those 15% cuts and we had an 8% reduction in the tax digest.
But it's based on the current mill rate, correct? It's not.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't understand your question. Yes, it's based on the rollback rate, so the current revenues. Yes, ma'am.
Right. So if what we're proposing to do is increase the mill rate by $0.5 mil, and by doing that, will that allow us to do some of these things that you are proposing to halt on this list?
Yeah, I think the council would then, depending what you would decide, and if you decided to add additional revenues, you would then look at these. And I know there are other priorities that are in your districts and citywide that are priority. And so I believe the assumption is that if the council made some adjustments, you would look at these areas as well as those that are important to our collective residents, and then update the budget based on those new revenues and your priorities before you adopt a budget. Okay.
And so my follow-up question is, there was a slide, and maybe some of the residents missed it. The question is, what are the other revenue streams aside of property tax? And that slide was showed earlier, so can you pull that up? And Mr. Donald, can you send this presentation to us so we can share it in our, I'm going to share the YouTube video, but I want the PowerPoint as well so that I can put it in my newsletter.
Yes, ma'am. So
it's already been sent to you, Councilwoman Willis.
Thank you. So aside of the property taxes, for people who are in the social media world and who someone asked this question, these are the other revenue streams aside of property taxes that the city is receiving. The property tax being our revenue is yielding mostly from property tax. Yesterday in the budget analysis that Mr. Millage presented, he had percentages broken down by each of these revenue streams or how much we receive.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the other question is, I know the legislators did that 3% cap to not tax people out of their homes. And you mentioned that. Can you give a little bit more clarity on that? Because it seemed, it appears that didn't come across as, and I know you had a slide and you mentioned that.
I'm sorry, which, could you?
Remember, you talked about how the legislators, the General Assembly passed some benefit.
Oh, so are you talking about the, so what I was referring to is the homestead exemption. So the homestead exemption, the increase in values, and I know our mayor can chime in on this, for quite some time, Fulton County and especially South Fulton County, values were way below where they should have properly been assessed. And so they were actually correctly assessed in the previous, for us, fiscal year, for our residents, the previous calendar year. And so there was a dramatic increase in the assessment, which resulted in a dramatic increase in the actual taxes that would have been paid by residents. And so our council, in partnership with those elected officials at the state level, put a tax, a homestead exemption for approval on the last ballot, which passed about 67, 68%. And so now a homestead exemption is in place for City of South Fulton residents. And Mayor, I would defer to you to talk about those values and what it means for the City of South Fulton.
Well, one of the things it does, and I will ask the mayor to talk about it too. But one of the things it does is cap the amount of increment increase at 3%.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. And again, I know Mr. Millage oversees all of our tax activities, and so if he would like to chime in on that, you know, beyond the homestead exemption and those other nuances, I would defer to him as our subject matter expert.
Okay, Mr. Millage, can you explain that?
So what it does, the 3%, as Mr. Donald has said, that the down south, Fulton County South, our property values were down. And up north, the property values went with the inflation. So when the northerners, who are the ones that suggested that we have to cap increase up to 3%, they are okay because their values have already gone up. While here, for us to be at the values where they are, we will need to increase more than the 3% they are talking about. And they tried, that was the first assessment last year, to try to bring in the values where they're supposed to, just to try it. And you saw big increases of values. The values went up, at the same time taxes went up as well. But we are not even closer to the values of properties that the northerners have. It's an advantage to the northerners ones because the values are already up, but it's a disadvantage to the south, both to the municipalities as well as to the homeowners, because if they are selling their properties, their values are down. If they want to increase taxes again, will be going up. There will be some municipalities in the south that they need revenues to go up or to increase taxes beyond the 3%. But if that, with that registration, they will be limited to increase more than 3%.
Okay, and my last question is, because I want to give courtesy to my other colleague, is one question that came through is, what are we planning on to increase our millage rate in subsequent years? And my understanding is, if we agree to this mill rate increase, if we decide to increase in subsequent years, our voters will have to approve. Am I correct, Mr. Donald?
So again, I would defer to Mr. Millage on that piece. I think he is the guru for all things related to the millage rate and those official recommendations to the council. So I would defer to him and his expertise.
Okay, so Mr. Milazzi, our charter dictates how much we can go up without going to the voters for a referendum. And so if we were to agree to the increase this year, and so that would put us close to that cap. So subsequent years, if the council decide we want to increase the mill rate, the voters will have to give us approval to do that, correct?
That's very correct, Councilwoman Willis. So our authorized millage rate as it is now is 13.4 mils as it stands now. Now, council has proposed to have a millage rate increase of 1 mil, which will take us from the rollback, which is 12.399 mils, to 13.399 mils, the one that has been advertised. If this millage rate passes and you adopt it, that means the next year, 2022 budget, the only option that you have to increase millage rate will be the 0.1 until you go to the referendum. So if we are planning next year to increase millage rate beyond 0.1 mil, we have to seek authorization from the citizen through referendum.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Willis. Listen, let me just make a few statements about something that the manager said, because I think it's important to know where we came from. When I was commissioner in Fulton County, every year, Patrick O'Connor told the Board of Commissioners that you need to raise taxes. But because of the fact that many people came down and protested against any tax increase, Fulton County never did that. But we found out that Patrick O'Connor was right in what he was saying. People in Fulton County at that time in South Fulton enjoyed a handsome property tax. And we were able to provide the minimum services that we could provide based on what we got. If you remember some time ago, the county asked for a contractor to go out and do a revitalization of commercial properties, especially in the city of Atlanta. And we found that those cities were they were very devaluated. But at that time, the bottom fell out the economy, and the county did not pursue that reevaluation of commercial property. So this is where we are today, to the point where when I was commissioner, it got to the point of no return. If some of you remember that in a meeting at Fulton County, I raised the taxes in South Fulton County by 4 mils. But I did it in a manner in which I went out to every community and showed them what that 4 mils, much what we're doing today, what that 4 mils mean to them. And I always remember that meeting, because when I tried to raise it 1, 2, and 3 mils, it was the Board of Commissioners who told me no. And at the last time I tried to name it at 4, I also remember Tom Lowe simply saying, Bill's got to have something. And so that's where the sowing process we came in. It got to the point where we had to do something. Lastly, let me say this. This is not extra money. This is truly new revenue. We don't have no extra money. And whatever we do, whatever we decide today, we're going into either we're going to maintain the level where we are, or we're going to exceed the level of where we are. And I think it's very important, and the manager said it, I think the expectations of the property owners in this city is to exceed that expectation. So I just want to give you a brief overlook of over the years, for 15, 20 years, we have had the luxury of low taxes, and this is why we've had it. Okay, any other question? All right.
Yes, I have a question. I was in the queue. Are we using the queue?
I'm in the queue too.
Okay, let me hold it for y'all go any further because I looked in the queue. It wasn't okay. Please let me know because obviously it's not coming through my queue. Okay, Mr. Khalid, and then Ms. Rao. Anybody else? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Khalid.
So I want to go back, Mr. Malazi, to this report that we got from Mr. Pickney about our tax digest. Have we reviewed the amended maps or the amended tax digest, and are we accepting the results? Are we appealing the results?
Councilman Khalid, if you remember, I brought up that issue in the executive session, and I explained, actually, I was not even allowed to finish.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that we have to talk specifically about what's happening in executive session.
No, I don't want to.
I just want to know, how does the process work? I am assuming that the tax assessor's office will send to you or to the city manager, please, please, when I'm done, correct how the process works. They will send over a list that says, here are all of the tax parcels in your city. Here is what is removed. And then you sign off on it saying like, we agree, we don't agree, or we're going to appeal. I know that that's kind of what happens when I get my property tax assessment, that there is like an appeals process and I can either accept it or appeal it. Is that what process that we have?
So what happens is, once we get that one, I conferred it with the city manager. Then we sat together. We thought it would be wise to share it with the council as quickly as possible, of which we did. And during that time of discussions, one of you, Mayor Pro Tem, she instituted to say, no, before we adopt this one, we need to have someone to represent, to explain what happened.
And so how long might we have? Because it's going to, how long do we have to make that appeal? Or
no, that appeal, you can make that appeal is whatever was presented. They have to, I think it's something that maybe we may need to discuss this one in executive session. So we don't say something here.
That's fine. I know, and it may not make a material difference in this year because we will.
That's true. That's very true.
We'll have to move forward. But I would like, and I know that we don't have a GIS person at this moment, but I would like to sit down when we get a GIS person. I would like to sit down and look at that and just confirm. I don't want us to just accept Fulton County said that these are no longer in the city of South Fulton, and we're just like, okay. The millage rate that the budget was calculated on was 12.399, correct?
That's true.
Okay, and so if you originally recommended a $0.5 increase to 12.899, and now we're doing we may do another increase to 13.399. It's my understanding that for a $0.5 increase that would generate $1.1 million, and that to 12, so if we went to 12.899, we would generate a new $1.1 million. And if we went to 13.399, we would generate a $2.2 million increase. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and these calculations, are they what collection rate are they assuming? Because I'm anticipating a lower collection rate because we are actually in a recession right now.
Because Fulton County has a history of collecting at least 97, 98%. So we have calculated everything considering what we are going through with this COVID-19 to 95% correction rate.
Okay, perfect. and maybe, so we've already dropped it 95. I would be interested to see, I know there was a great recession in 2006 and 2007. I think that those collection rates might be instructive to what we might be able to anticipate. So my last, and this is just a comment, but my last request would be, in our future budget presentations, I would like to see a projection where if we vote for 12.899 and we raise an extra 1.1 million, exactly what budget items those would be spent on, what budget lines would be impacted, and how they would look different. So basically, I'm asking for, I don't need a whole 76-page thing, but I would like a chart that says, we have a budget for 12.399. I would like to see what the budget is at 12.899 and what the budget is at 13.399. Because just in my growing up, when I would ask my parents for more money, they would say, what is it for? And so I think that our citizens deserve to see exactly what these extra millions we're generating, exactly what things they will go to.
I think Councilman Khalid, I think you already have that. The budget that was presented to you as the city manager has mentioned is based on rollback of 12.399 mils. Then after that, during his presentation, he came up with various projects, and most of them were from public safety, public works, that should you allow this half mil or 1 mil, these are the projects. To include this one that he has just mentioned today, that most of these ones we will not take a step. We will not make all of them, but at least we will get some of these ones that he has just itemized during this presentation that we couldn't afford because of lack of money. So those will be the projects that will accommodate the increase of the $2.2 million.
So Mr. Donald, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're asking for, and everyone's right here. So I think there is, Mr. Millage did provide a breakdown of if it goes up $500,000, if it stays the same, that's my proposed budget. Well, not stays the same, but the rollback, that's the proposed budget that was presented. But there's a page specifically that breaks down half mil, et cetera, in the budget. And then what you're asking for is basically what was cut out of the budget. And so while we presented that through the department heads, what we can do is provide to the council a list of all of the things was cut out of the budget. So it appears what you're asking for is, this is what the revenue looks like based on a pending council decision. Here are different things that we have to consider adding into the budget if the millage rate, if you decided to go beyond the rollback. And so, but the prioritization of it is actually a council decision. So yes, which one of those items is top priority to add back in as you make your decision is one that is under the will and wisdom of the council.
All right, if it would be possible, and I apologize if I have missed it somehow, but if it would be possible that we could have a one sheet with itemized expenses with dollar amounts
that would cut out,
that would help us drive that decision.
Absolutely, we're actually working to have that to you. I think by Thursday, we're taking all of the cuts and just putting them into one document, so you can see what they were and what the total amount was, as well as the individual amounts as well.
And to be clear, is everything that was cut out, because it sounds like everything that was cut out will not be able to be put back in at the 13.399. Is that what you're saying?
I doubt that it would be. I don't think that everything would be, and you would have to prioritize, not to mention, you know, there are some priority projects that the council has, and some of those would be based on your districts as well. And so I think for our perspective, those things that are cut out, it depends on what the council sees as the top priority. You have 5 big buckets that you have identified as your city priorities. And so it would be my assumption that as you deliberate, you would identify those areas based on that. I would again defer to both your will and wisdom in determining that priority.
All right, well, I look forward to getting that sheet. Thank you.
And also, Councilman
Okay.
Khalid, you remember that the main aim of the half-mil increase was also, part of that was also to fund public safety building. So also take into account of that.
So if all
Okay.
of that is on the sheet, that would be great.
Okay, let's move on. But I have two more people in the queue that I'm going to ask to make responses. I would say to you all, we've had several conversations about this budget and how we can do things. I don't want us to be repetitive because I feel that this particular meeting is to hear what the people has to say. So I'm going to acknowledge Mrs. Rao, and then I will close this conversation out with Ms. Williams.
Quick question. With the original budget as proposed, is the contingency factored in into the budget?
Yeah, I believe it's correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Milazzi, but as transmitted, it was 1.7 million in contingency and a 1.5 million, goodness, I'm drawing a blank. Fund balance. Is that correct, Mr. Milazzi?
It's $1.7 million in contingency, with the majority of that may be used to accommodate the acquisition of Wolf Creek, which may be about $1 million, depending on our discussions with Fulton County, if we can pay much lesser than that.
I think my question specifically to answer not what it's composed of, but am I correct that it's the 1.7 contingency, and again, they decide how it's earmarked and allocated, and then the 1.5 in in fund balance. Are those numbers correct? Because I think that's specifically what she's asking.
Yeah, we are projecting that. That's correct.
Okay.
And that's at the 12.889 mils.
I thought it was 12.3.
12.3.
So the original budget.
Yeah, the proposed budget, correct. Yeah.
Okay, so even if we went to half a mil from where we originally were, there, I mean, we would be able to take care of the acquisition of Wolf Creek. But to have any kind of contingency, at a minimum, we have to go to the midpoint. Is that correct?
Well, I think you have a contingency regardless. You have remember the city at one point, I believe that year one, we had a $50,000 contingency. I think right now, this $1.7 million contingency is exactly, what it says it is. And while some of those funds are projected to be used for the acquisition of Wolf Creek, how we acquire it, the timing and things of that nature, I think allow the contingency to remain in place. And I don't know if that's a conversation we want to have right now, or if this is the appropriate venue, but I would look at it for what it is, and that's a $1.7 million contingency. And as Mr. Milazzi highlighted, the projected 1.5 in fund balance, which are all numbers that have not existed ever in the city's history.
Right, and I'm very interested in the contingency, not only for what I mentioned in terms of acquisition, but the fact that we're in a pandemic and we are in certain times and working to be reimbursed for expenses incurred. Mm-hmm. And so how do we manage that is really, as I assess where we should be, I'm looking at 3 different rates in my mind and trying to figure out where we need to be. So, I think it's all relevant to kind of where we are in this conversation. So I just wanted to give insight. And as we've operated under this reimbursement for CARES Act funds, is that money just switched out of department? So you don't use that contingency line for that at all? Is that correct?
So we have done very well. We have not budgeted that the acts, when it comes, that will be additional revenues, and because we don't know when it will come. So that's another question that we have. It's not budgeted anywhere else, and that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, remember you cannot, but if you budget for the way the rules are written, if you budget for the CARES Act funding, then, I mean, if you budget for the coronavirus pandemic, then you are not
might have
eligible for
reimbursement.
reimbursement. Yeah.
Right. I'm just trying to understand that the operational side of it. Was it being put from contingency because it's an unknown? But
No, but I think if we talk about it here,
I understand.
yeah,
I got it.
okay.
I got it. I don't have any other questions. I think you know, they've pretty much been answered by my colleagues. I mean, the questions have been raised.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Rao. We will conclude with Ms. Willis, and then I will open up the public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor Edwards, for recognizing me, and thanks for also emphasizing that we need to really make this about the community. And I, as such, have been trying to pull some of the questions out of the chat. And one of the questions that was raised, and also I have a question about it too, is how will this budget impact improving the 911 services? There are some residents that have complained throughout citywide that we need to improve the 911 service. So with this current budget, how will it impact it? And if we do agree to the mill rate increase, I didn't see that as a priority on the list. Do we have any plans to try to improve that service?
So I think the 911 services we have put some pressure on Fulton County to improve the overall service, but actually any adjustment to 911 is slightly out of the budgetary controls that we have. For us to stand up our own 911, our initial inquiries show that to create the infrastructure, it cost about $20 million. The city is not on a path to be able to do that within the next couple of years, even in good economic times. But I think behind the scenes, our council knows we've started the visits and the evaluations to be able to move towards being self-sustaining. But the improvement in services is just something we have to hold the county's feet to the fire to. Those costs are fixed and they are listed in the budget. I think under E911, is that correct, Mr. Millage?
Yes.
And so those costs are already fully accounted for and they're fully funded. And so to improve the service delivery, that is the responsibility of both our police chief and myself to light a fire under the county. And so with this being in the public meeting, if you could, offline forward us the contact information, I ask them to get it to you or however is most appropriate. We can find out what those challenges are and then work with the county to correct them. Okay,
and Mr. Donald, can you please, just for the education of residents, let residents know where you're going to post this this PowerPoint again, and so where this YouTube video. I said City of South Fulton website, but if you can give them any more specific.
So we have on the city manager's page, while things are in the proposed state, we have the proposed budget placed there. The budget deliberations and all of that information, we will actually, and it may already be up, but this will have a separate tab that I think we're calling it South Fulton Mill and Budget 101. And so I just got confirmation it is up and it's under presentations on the city manager's page. So it's readily available there. And, knowing our council and our communications folks, we'll make sure to actually spread it widely through the various newsletters, social media, and other places so our residents have it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Ms. Willis. And Mr. Clerk, are you there?
Yes, sir.
I want to open the public hearing.
Okay, this is the public hearing for the millage rate. I would like to read into the record that this is an the first reading of an ordinance to establish the 2020 millage rate for the city property tax for the city of South Fulton, Georgia, and for other lawful purposes at a proposed millage rate of 13.399. Mr. Mayor and Council, we have 11 total residents who have submitted public comment. I will begin with the first one. The first one comes from Mr. Andre Legister, who lives on Sable Trail in District 5. He states, "We love it here, so don't price us out of our home due to tax increases. Not many places left for middle-class working families to own a home while having access to a decent wage. No millage rate increase, please. Focus on growing the tax base by incentivizing and encouraging more businesses to move to South Fulton. We have plenty of land space, consumer base, workforce, and are in an enviable position logistically. No millage rate increase. You can't carry a city on the backs of its residents. We need a commercial tax base. The Old National Development Authority is a move in the right direction." Resident number 2, Ms. Christina Clark, who lives on Estes Drive in District 5. "After reading the proposed rate increase, what are the plans for attaching businesses in the area, and how much of this increase is going to go towards the schools? I particularly don't mind small tax increases if it's going towards improving the lackluster school system that is in place now." Resident 3, Ms. Jewel Johnson, who lives on Orkney Lane in District 1. "South Fulton is in excellent financial position. In looking at the budget, I am of the opinion we do not need a millage increase because the city has been given $2.5 million for COVID-19. If this was a reimbursement, then you have an extra $2.5 million in your budget. Based on the amended budget for public safety, the 2021 budget increase would be either 1.5 million or over 2 million. Why do we need an increase? What is it for? Why can't we use what we have already been reimbursed for? I cannot agree to raise our millage rate over what I have read from the budget. I am encouraging the mayor and council not to vote for a millage rate increase." Resident 3, Mr. Elijah Watkins, who lives on Spicewood Court in District 6. "Hi, my name is Elijah Watkins, age 26, and a current resident of South Fulton. Thanks to the communication of my council member, Khalid, I was informed about the proposal to prioritize the revitalization of South Fulton with projects like the Renaissance Development for Seniors and Assisted Living. As a young Black resident of this area, it's in my humble opinion that our city and its representatives must continue to place supreme priority of the residents by creating livable amenities that make our city more attractive to prospective residents. The more attractive our city becomes, the higher the demand of new citizens, thus increasing revenue to our fiscal budget. On the other hand, cracked, decades-old pavements, dated apartment complexes, i.e. Camelot, and lack of attractive businesses like Starbucks and Chick-fil-A will ensure that both money and residents will flock to spend taxable revenue in other municipalities. We must be innovative and invest in the future if we are to shine as an exemplary Black city in America and in the world." Next resident, Mr. Kenneth Terry, who lives on Cedar Grove Road in District 4. "The city is only a few years old, and you're considering raising the millage rate already. I lived in the city of Fairburn prior to the annexation into the city of South Fulton. Taxes were fair. Please do not raise the millage rate, causing hardship on residents and discouraging future residents from moving to our city. Thank you." Next resident, Miss Rosa Robinson, who lives on Oak Bend Court. No district was stated. I believe it's District 7. "Will seniors who have homestead exemption be affected by the tax increase?" Next resident, Mr. James Reese, who lives on West Stubbs Road in District 4. I'm opposed to a tax increase. We are in the midst of a pandemic and we have citizens who have lost their jobs, face reduced hours, and possibly losing their homes. It is not prudent to ask citizens to shell out more when the city is not staying within its budgeted means. The city has more than enough funding to carry out the mandated requirements of the city. We started this city partially to enhance public safety as a means of lowering our insurance rates and ultimately property taxes. This body is failing its needs a tax increase. 4 to 5 months into a pandemic, the city should have saved enough funds to offset any need for a tax increase. Additionally, the rising values in property assessments has given the city a windfall in the last year, and the city has chosen to keep those funds instead of refunding them. Now the city wants an increase on top of the continual rising assessments. The continued budget amendments when the city receives a windfall in SPLOST is troubling. The practice of spending every new dime is bad management. Those funds should be put away in a reserve fund. The city manager should be required to live within the city since he wants to raise our taxes. Everyone voting or recommending any increase in taxes should be required to live in the city. They should have to live with their decision. Salary increases for the council remains an issue. Again, I am not for a tax increase of any kind. Next resident, Mrs. Karaya Burris, who lives on Eden Road in District 1. Since you are already posting citizens' concerns as late as August 23rd, 2020 on Nextdoor, could you continue to post meeting or any important information weekly or when necessary on Nextdoor? Things that affect citizens personally or changes made in the community is what I would like to be posted to keep us informed, like the millage rates. This information is very important to taxpayers. Thank you. Next resident, Mrs. Pamela Harris, who lives on Lyon Avenue in District 1. To whom it may concern, it is my understanding that the millage rate will be increasing. Can you tell us how much the percentage rate will change in subsequent years? Depending on the percentage rate each year, the increase could be quite significant, especially for senior citizens. We need a change in legislation to assure seniors that they will not be displaced in the future. Many seniors were taxed out of their homes in California in 1976 and 78, and also in the 4th Ward here in Atlanta. A large contributor of Proposition 13 that passed in California was the sentiment that older Californians should not be priced out of their homes through high taxes. The proposition has been called the third rail, meaning untouchable subject of California politics. I'm proposing that the city of South Fulton create a Proposition 13 type tax shelter to protect our seniors. We seniors need a fixed cap rate where the maximum amount of any ad valorem tax on real property should not exceed 1% of the full cash value of such property. The 1% tax to be collected by the county and a portion according to law to the districts within the counties. She says, concerned senior citizens of South Fulton. I have 2 more. The next resident is Miss Detria Russell, who lives on Calverton Lane in District 1. Can this tax increase be delayed for 12 months to allow our community to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic? The last speaker is Mrs. Joyce Jones, who lives on New Hope Road in District 1. Why was it necessary to allocate $150,000 for parks and recreation during a pandemic? The summer is almost over and the budget is tight. If the spending is not curbed, we will be in debt and many City of South Fulton residents will be displaced. Mr. Mayor and Council, that completes the public comment. We would like to announce that the link to provide Further public comment is still active on the city clerk's page, agendas and minutes, and encourage citizens to continue to submit comments that will be read at the next public hearing. Thank you.
Okay, let me thank everyone who has made public comment. I'm hoping that the presentation made by the manager and the treasurer has helped you in some way, but we will continue to answer all questions even after this meeting. Hearing that, I will close the public hearing, Mr. Clerk. And
I move that we close public hearing for August 26, 2020, our 10 a.m. Special call meeting hearing.
Second.
I don't know if we need that, but this was properly moved to second. Any discussion?
I have
Hearing
a discussion.
Yes.
Did we want to address any of the public comments that we heard just now?
That's not usually what we do. We hear what all the public comments are. And there are further comments that's going to be coming in. We address them in our vote for the millage rate.
Okay.
Mayor?
Yes.
Most of those public comments, a lot of those public comments we addressed, Mr. Donald addressed through his presentation.
Right.
And so then Mr. Millage, and then I have pulled a lot of those comments that came through public hearing. I pulled them out of the chat and I posed those questions. So they have been addressed.
Okay. Well, procedurally, let me stop right here, because procedurally I didn't have to have a motion to close the public hearing. I was saying that the public hearing was closed and that I was going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So he would just
Motion
need
to
a
adjourn.
council. Okay.
All right, there's a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Properly moved and second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, Mr. Clerk?
Councilmember Rao,
Yes.
Councilmember Gums,
Yes.
Councilmember Willis,
Yes.
Councilmember Gilliard,
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves,
Aye.
Councilmember Khalid,
Yes.
Councilmember Baker.
Aye.
Mr. Mayor, that motion was approved.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned.